All right. Well, we've got a big group this morning for our the Retail Coach webinar series, how to present your retail potential. My name's Aaron Farmer, Senior Vice President with the Retail Coach, and joining me today is Bryce London, uh, Director of Retail Strategy for the Retail Coach. A little bit about our company, and then I want to just jump right into the webinar and really talk about how to present that retail potential. But we work with municipalities throughout the country. We know most of you on this webinar today. We've worked in over 400 communities in about 29 states. Have been doing this since about 2000, so about 16 years of service. And something we really pride ourselves on is an 88% repeat client rate. Kelly Kofer, the founder of our company, president and CEO. Many of you know Kelly. Worked for a national retailer before the Retail Coach, and really founded the Retail Coach to help small to medium and also large communities get in front of retailers, restaurants, and developers. My background, Aaron Farmer here. My background graduated from Texas A&M University and also an MBA from Texas A&M Commerce. But before the Retail Coach, I worked on projects with a number of retailers: FedEx, Kinko's, Sally Beauty Supply, Adidas, Concentra, and several others. Scott Emerson, who's on the webinar with us today as well, brings an interesting dynamic to the Retail Coach with an architecture background. He has an architecture degree from Mississippi State. Um, really focuses on what the retailers are looking for when deciding where to locate stores. And then Bryce, who also comes to us from a different perspective, having worked in the oil and gas industry, been working with the Retail Coach for a while now, focused on helping our clients throughout the country understand retail. Couple of things I want to mention here real quick. If you're looking at your screen, on the right side of your screen, you'll see a little tab, a little gray tab for questions. So as we go, if you have questions, if you'll just type your question into that box there, we'll make sure to answer that question before the webinar is over. So really, we're going to start today. Our agenda really got three main things we're going to talk about. Number one is assessing your retail opportunities. So looking at what retail opportunities you have in your community. We're also going to talk about marketing, the community retail marketing. Retailers and developers look for certain things in marketing materials that they get from communities or from developers. So we want to talk to you a little bit about that, and then we're going to finish up today talking about uh, preparation for conferences. We know about the International Council of Shopping Centers conferences, but also the Retail Live conferences and other conferences throughout the country. And the key to these conferences is being prepared. So I want to talk to you about that today. But I'm going to hand this over to Bryce and let him take you through the first part of the webinar.
Thanks, thanks, Aaron. So yeah, like Aaron said, we wanted to set up the webinar kind of in this format and this agenda because from our perspective, in the community clients that we work for, we kind of view there's three different things from a how to present your community to the retail community is first off having a very thorough understanding of what your opportunities are, understanding your community, understanding the people in your community, understanding the retail capabilities within the community. So that's the first thing that has to happen before we can start the marketing. And then next is once you have that understanding, it's really moving into a targeted marketing approach, and a specific marketing approach for individual retailers and restaurants. That's extremely important to get the right information in front of them. And we'll talk a little bit about that. And then, as Aaron said, from a community perspective, when you go through the first couple steps, then you start to move into that conference. Going to some of the ICSC conferences and the Retail Live that he mentioned is what can you do as a community to be prepared and maximize the effectiveness of those. So we'll go ahead and move right into what we call kind of assessing your retail opportunities. And I want to start, it's really, really important, and a lot of the client communities that we work with, we follow a lot of comprehensive plans or we're a part of the beginning developments of a comprehensive plan, and it's extremely important as a community to have that cohesive vision and a strategy of where the community wants to go. And that needs to be kind of, when do we want to develop a certain, part of the community? Where are the different development opportunities for us? And how is the community going to get there? And that's something that we spend a lot of time with our clients on, because it's extremely important to have a database plan for the communities, because that's the best way to maximize the effectiveness when you start to get into the actual recruitment of the retailers. Um, and starting off, you've heard a lot of us, if we've had the opportunity to be in front of you, or if you're a client of ours, from our perspective, the very first thing that we have to do is we have to understand the area around your market. We got to know which retailers are in your area, if they're in a competing community, or if they're within your retail, trade area. Why do they locate there? What are the communities in the area around you? What sites do they have available for the retailers? What is the difference in the demographics? That's something that's extremely important. That when we start to dial down and identify a match list and start to identify a target from the retailers, we have to understand, how do you differ from a demographic standpoint or a psychographic standpoint? We'll talk more about psychographics, but it's important to understand the differences, because a retailer, they're not looking at city limits, and so for us, we've got to position the community that we're working for, in your community. You got to position it to the unique attributes and the best selling points of the community. And so that's a extremely important first step before you actually get into the community part of it, is really understanding the area that you're in. You might be a small rural community, or maybe you're a part of a large metroplex with a lot of competition around you. It's important to understand that, and that's one thing that we spend a tremendous amount of time on, because everything that we do has to be based off of a true understanding of how you compete in the market around you.
Yeah, great point, Bryce. One of the things, if you'll go back one slide for me, one of the things that I know many of the communities on this call are dealing with is the store spacing issue. You'll hear from retailers, and they'll say, "Oh, well, we like your community, but we've got a store 7 miles down the road, and we're afraid of that cannibalization that might take place." So, store spacing, I know, is one of the things that many of you are dealing with right now with these retailers, and trying to get them to locate your community. What you have to do is you have to basically do the work of these retailers for them, to show them that you do have the demand, do have the potential. So, store spacing is something we're all dealing with in our communities, but you can overcome that by showing them that they can make money. You can overcome that by showing them that there is a market and they can be successful there. So we're going to talk more about store spacing as we go forward, but I wanted to make sure and mention that.
Thanks, Aaron. So once you have a thorough understanding of the area and the market around you, then it really comes down to a very thorough, in-depth dive into your community, the people in your community. What is the current retail base? What's the makeup of the national retail versus maybe regional retail, or your small business independent owners? What does the community want? What can it support? What is that vision for the different areas within the community? Those are all things that we spend a lot of time trying to really dive into, to really understand the community, the people in the community, so that we can support that vision going forward. And I challenge you, all the communities represented on this call, is to really, have that cohesive vision. I mean, both from an EDC level, maybe city government, council, have that cohesive vision to make it to maximize your opportunities and the effectiveness when you start to develop these retail opportunities. Okay, so the first kind of what we call, when we start talking about the assessing your retail opportunities, is the first thing that we have to do is we have to determine the retail trade area. And a lot of people might be familiar with this, but this is the largest distance that consumers are willing to travel to purchase retail goods and services. Most of the time when we work with the community, we'll have a primary retail trade area and a secondary retail trade area. But all the retailers and all restaurants, they're all going to have some sort of criteria when it comes to retail trade area. And so having an accurate, reliable, fact-based retail trade area is the first step and is crucial when you to move into the actual recruitment of the retailers. And what we're going to do is we're going to kind of go into the different methods to determine a retail trade area, and then introduce kind of a new way that we're working with our client communities on.
Yeah. Out of everything we do, everything we talk about today, the retail trade area portion of this presentation is probably the most important. That's what's going to convince a retailer to come to your community. Do you have a retail trade area population of 20,000, or is it a trade area of 50,000? So, a good example is Chili's. We talk to a lot of communities that want to get a Chili's to their community. Well, Chili's, before they'll even consider locating in the community, they have to have about 50,000 in a trade area. So if we talk about anything today, more important, more than anything, remember the retail trade area and focus on that. Your community is much more than a city limits population. So we're going to talk about determining retail trade areas, those sort of things a little bit further on.
So when you start talking about retail trade area, I wanted to add in the way that we approach a retail trade area when we look at a community is not only, there's not a community retail trade area. We actually break up the community into what we call retail districts. If you're a community that has interstate frontage, but then you have a separate downtown district, or maybe you've got a community strip center, power center that serves some of the neighborhoods around it. Those are three very distinct retail districts. They demand a different level of retail, and they have a different retail trade area. Obviously, if you've got a retail district with interstate frontage, that's going to be a much larger retail trade area than a small independent business owner kind of centric downtown. So it's important for us to differentiate those three, because each of those are going to demand a different marketing approach. They're going to have a different retail trade area. They're going to serve different demographics. They're going to the people in that retail trade area are different. Their purchasing habits might be different. So I wanted to add that in when you start talking about retail trade areas. Actually, a community can have multiple retail trade areas within that community, and it's important to differentiate those. And so that's something that we focus on. And I wanted to add that in when we start talking about these retail trade areas, is actually your community can have multiple of them. So like Aaron said, the retail trade area is important for this reason. Once you establish that retail trade area, most of the time, if not all the time, it is going to be larger than your community or city population. And once you establish that retail trade area of 70,000 for a community that might have a population of 20,000, well, you are no longer going to market yourself as a 20,000 person community. You serve a retail trade area of 70,000, and that's really, really important, because you don't want to underserve yourself in the eyes of the retail community. They're not looking at city limit populations. They're looking at what is the true market of my store or my restaurant. So it's really important to have that accurate information so that you can better serve yourself and you can better market the community to those retailers and those restaurants. A lot of you might be familiar. So the first kind of method is determining radials. So you might look at the center of your community or a certain shopping center. What is that 5, 10, 15, 20 mile radial around that area? And that is something that we do. But I'll say this, kind of like the slide says, one of the issues with that is if you're looking at a 15 or 20 mile radial, well, it's not taking into account that maybe if you're going to go to a Target 20 miles away, there might be one 10 miles before that. So is that giving a true accurate representation of the consumers and where they're going to come from? I'm currently living in Houston, and before I lived in Houston, I lived for a few years in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Loved it. It was a great experience. Loved the city. I lived about 7 miles south of downtown. And so, absolutely, I'm within that 10-mile radial. But I'll tell you, during that 7 miles, I had to pass through 2 downtowns. I had to go around a hill and through a tunnel to get to downtown. Give or take 25, 30 minutes in the summertime. In the wintertime, it could be an hour. So realistically, from a retail trade, I was not a, maybe from a secondary perspective, I might go downtown to shop every couple weeks, once a month. So that's kind of an example of one of the issues you run into with radials is it's not always completely accurate to who is traveling that distance to shop. But that is the kind of the first method. That's one method to determine a retail trade area.
Yeah, great point, Bryce. Let's look to that next slide. Radials and drive times. The other way to look at it is drive times. How many people live within a certain drive time of a community? 10, 15, 20-minute, 30-minute drive time. I got to be honest with you though. Radials and drive times are becoming a thing of the past. Retailers nowadays are requiring that much more when determining a trade area, or you as communities determining a trade area. Forget about radials and drive times. You might get one or two retailers that ask for that kind of information, but now it's just much more important to have, whether it's a license plate analysis, it's a cell phone analysis, more detailed factual information showing where these trade areas are. So Bryce, let's flip to that next slide.
Okay.
One of the ways to do this is to determine a trade area is to go talk to your retailers. That's what we do in every community. First thing we do is we conduct surveys of existing businesses that are in the community. Who knows it better than those that are working, the managers, the owners that are working in these retail stores in your community. They know where their consumers are coming from. Most of them are tracking that information. The larger big boxes, your Targets, your Walmarts, your grocery stores, they're tracking this information. So that's one way to do it, is go talk to your retailers, find out where customers are coming from. The other way to do it is kind of a combined approach, which is where you kind of take in the radial, you take in the drive times, you take in talking to those retailers, and you kind of combine those to determine the trade area. This is the trade area we have on the screen here that's kind of in the light blue color that extends out to the east past the circle on the screen, is one that we completed for Terrell, Texas. And what this included was a license plate analysis. We also did a cell phone analysis to determine where customers were coming from to shop and eat. And you'll see it's not a computer model. It's a polygon, a custom polygon that is hand-drawn based off of this information. And that's the way to do this. Forget about the computer models. Like I said, there might be a few retailers that still exist that are looking for these computer models, but nowadays they're just looking for so much more. One of the ways we do this is a cell phone analysis, and we call it our consumer density study. But it's scary to think about, but we can look at any shopping center in your community. So for this community, we looked at a Costco, and we looked at it over a year's time period to determine where are the consumers coming from. The darker the red was the higher concentration of consumers that were shopping in the community. We can also do a dot density map where we can tell the exact home addresses based off of this cell phone analysis that we do to determine where these consumers are coming from. This is the kind of information we kind of introduced, the retail coach using this new system at the last ICSC conference in Las Vegas, and it was very well received by retailers. They couldn't believe, many of them, that we have this kind of data on consumers. But it's better than a radial. It's better than a drive time. It actually tells where your specific consumers are coming from, that factual data. So if you haven't had a cell phone analysis done, give us a call, because this is, it's so powerful to have this type of information, and it's just so much more accurate than just relying on computer models. So basically, you pick a location in the community. It could be a downtown area. It could be a specific retailer, like it's on the screen here for Costco. We'll run that analysis, and it'll actually tell us over a year's time period where the consumers are coming from to shop and eat. Very, very well accepted in the retail industry. It blows these retailers and developers away to know that this kind of data is out there.
Yeah, I'll add to that. So on the last webinar, we talked a little bit about retailers these days have never had the amount of information for their consumers than they do right now. We're in the age of big data, and the capabilities that they have. So really, when it comes to, from a community perspective, is match data with data. Get the right information, get all the information in front of them to make it easier for them to understand the possibilities within your community, because they have that information of everything that they're looking for. And so it's key to kind of match that capability from the community level to get that in front of those retailers. You hear a lot of people will talk about restaurants. A lot of communities that we work for, we want to attract restaurants, and one of the big things we'll talk about in a second is kind of that workplace population. You know, if you're a bedroom community, a lot of the population, during the day leaves town to go to work. So wanted to look at this, the cell phone analysis. One of the capabilities that it gives us is we can look at what the different heat maps are at different parts of the day, or weekend versus weekday. So this is an Applebee's for a community, and this is during the lunchtime. So this kind of gives you an idea of of where the people are coming for that Applebee's during lunch. But if you look at it at dinner, you see a much different retail trade area. And so this kind of adds some credence to when we start talking about, from a restaurant perspective, of what is that daytime versus nighttime, population. A lot of these restaurants know that they can support themselves at night, but what is that lunch crowd going to look like? So having this level of detail when you start talking about the different retail trade areas, the demographics within that, not only on a macro level, but also at different parts of the day. It's extremely powerful, like Aaron said, and it's something that is well received by them, and it gives them the ability to really understand their consumers. You look at a Target. Target is what we would call a regional retailer. It's typically a part of a regional retail district within the communities that we serve. If you look at it during the weekday, this Target, you can see the star. It's right there in between Minneapolis and St. Paul, and you see a much different weekday retail trade area than you do on the weekend. You see that it's primarily an east to west. This Target is on the highway, so during the weekend, it's travelers who are going east to west or west to east off of Highway 94. But on the weekday, probably due to work, there's probably some offices around there. It extends further to the north and the south. So from a regional retailer's perspective, you can see the differences, not only during the weekday versus the weekend. So we wanted to kind of highlight those differences just to kind of help everyone understand the level of detail and the level of information that we go to make sure that gets in front of these retailers, because they absolutely, these retailers want to minimize risk as much as possible, and providing this level of information helps them and assists them to minimize that risk of what is their true market potential. So once we have the retail trade area defined, and that's that retail trade area like we mentioned for the different retail districts, then we move into the demographic profiling. So everyone's familiar with the demographic profiling. I just wanted to highlight a few different things. We talked about it last time, but population growth. In a survey that ICSC did with a lot of different retailers, the population growth and the changes of the demographics within the community is one piece of the information that they sometimes have a hard time quantifying and qualifying. And so when you look at the demographics of your community, I wanted to highlight that population growth. I mean, and us as a company, when we work for a community, we know a different residential neighborhood might be going in certain places, or maybe there's different apartment complexes that are moving in or coming out. Those kind of changes affect these retailers and the markets that they're looking at. So I wanted to mention that, to highlight it, that from a community perspective, make sure that those population changes and the population growth especially is something that's being advertised. That's really important for these retailers, and sometimes that's hard information for them to get. And we mentioned it last time, that median income. That's kind of the direction is, instead of looking at an average income from a community, it's that median income. The macroeconomics of this country, you see kind of a more of a divergence of the lower income, higher income, and so these retailers understand that. And so that median income gives them a better understanding versus an average, because the average can be skewed one way or the other. So I wanted to highlight those two things when you look at the demographics to make sure that that's being represented within the demographics of the community.
Yeah, and Bryce, one last thing I'll add on demographics. I can't stress this enough, but as communities, make sure you have up-to-date demographics. If you don't have 2016 demographics, you're behind the curve. Retailers, restaurants, developers, they require up-to-date demographics. Can't stress enough that I go to communities on a daily basis, and many of them are still operating off of census data. So if you don't already have that 2016 data, we'll help you with that. Give us a call, email us after this, but make sure you have 2016 demographics. That is key.
Yeah, good point. One of the things is, from the demographic perspective, is the race classification. One thing, a challenge for us is to really look between the lines and really understand in detail the different demographics that are represented. And, you see a lot of it within, Hispanic, Latino. I mean, that can mean a lot of different things when you start talking about consumer habits, consumer purchases, and so it's really important. And I just wanted to add that is one thing for us that we try, and when we spend our time in the communities, is understanding the people behind these percentages and understanding the people behind these demographics, because it changes kind of how we pursue and target these retailers. And a lot of that comes into what we call the psychographics. So for those who are not familiar, psychographics is basically taking the demographics one step further. It's saying, a Caucasian male, 30 years old, in upstate New York, who makes $100,000 a year, he has different purchasing habits than a Caucasian male, 30 years old, who makes $100,000 in South Texas. And that, what the psychographics tells these retailers are, besides just the demographics, what are the purchasing habits? What are the lifestyles of the people in this community? And I'll go back to these retailers having the information at their fingertips of who their true consumers are. This is a very, very important aspect, and this is extremely important when we present the community to these retailers, is we understand who makes up the community. What are they looking for from a retail perspective? What is their true lifestyle habit? What is their purchasing behaviors? And that's what the psychographics tells us. For example, a client community of ours, when you start to look at the top 10 tapestry segments or the lifestyle segments, I mean, you've got 36% of this community is up-and-coming families. Well, they demand a different type of retail. They have different purchasing habits than your retirement community. 2% of this community is retirement. I mean, those are very distinct differences and dynamic differences when it comes to the type of purchasing they're going to do and the lifestyles that they serve. So it's important to understand this. And a lot of times, you in the community, the people in the community, but this kind of it quantifies that understanding that you have, and it allows us to present that to the retail community. So that's kind of what the psychographics are, and that's the important. I know I've heard you mention multiple times. You estimate that probably 60 to 70% right now of retailers kind of use this in their site selection process. Probably a much higher percentage, if not all, use this information when it comes to inventory, stocking, what they're going to put on the shelves when you enter the retail store. But I will tell you this: if Aaron, if you estimate 60 to 70% are using it now, that is only going to get higher, because as they learn more about their consumers, they'll demand this kind of level of detail in the information.
Yeah, and Bryce, the best way I've heard psychographics described is, we all know what demographics are: age, income, those sort of things. Best way I've heard it described is psychographics is demographics on steroids. So like you said at the beginning, it takes it to that next step.
So here's an example. Senior sun seekers. This is kind of how the psychographics are breaking up. Married couple, no kids. Typically older, 50. Average age of 53, and you start to look at kind of education levels, home values and what their lifestyle is. And so determining the different lifestyles within the community, you start to develop what their purchasing habits and their purchasing power might be. So the next step in the kind of the analysis phase is that leakage or gap analysis, or a lot of times what we'll call it is an opportunity analysis. And this is where we're comparing the actual sales of different categories, retail categories, with the potential sales. And the potential sales is based off of a state average adjusted for income. But it's important that we understand what are the different categories of retail that people are leaving the community to go shop for. You can ask, when we do our surveying and we ask people around the community, everyone will tell you, oh, well, we can't find this in the community, or I've got to drive here because they're the only ones that have this store. So understanding that is important when we start to develop a strategy of the type of retail and the retailers that we're going to target and recruit for our client communities. The example right here, you see over $1 million of leakage in shoe stores. So for us, we're going to look at, Payless, Rack Room. We're going to look at some of those retailers to kind of meet and fill that gap. It's important that we not necessarily get caught up in the exact value of the leakage, but what are some of the trends? What are those top categories? And to develop a strategy for each one of those. Not
Yes.
every. I'm sorry.
I was going to say, so, the gap analysis, this leakage analysis is probably, we talked about the trade area being the number one of importance to get in front of retailers. How large is your trade area? Number two is the gap analysis or leakage analysis. How much money is leaving the community on a regular basis? This is how you show that potential to these communities. So, on the screen here, you see where it says shoe stores. We found a leakage of about $1 million in shoe stores for this community. So what we did is we went after Payless, Shoe Show, Shoe Department, Rack Room, and Shoe Carnival. I don't remember which one it was, but it was either Shoe Show or Shoe Department that actually located in this community. So make sure if you don't have a gap analysis or a leakage analysis, make sure you've had one completed recently, and that's key. I mean, we can help you with that, but gap analysis, leakage analysis is one of the things that helps convince a retailer they need to locate in your community.
And adding to that, we won't spend much time on this, but to validate and to supplement that gap analysis is conduct a spending survey. This is something that we do, but really provides another level of detail when you start to develop that strategy for retail development. That consumer spending survey. Where are they leaving to go shop? What do they want to see in the community? So what are their preferences? That's another level of detail to develop that overall strategy and that overall marketing pitch of the community. And the workforce population, we talked about this when you start to develop the retail trade area. This is really, really important, especially for the communities that are looking for restaurants and maybe have a large percentage of the population leave during the day to go shop, maybe a suburb of a large metroplex or suburb of a larger city. One of the things that I wanted to point out is it's important to, first off, quantify what that workforce daytime population is. What is the true percentage during the day versus night of who's leaving the community. But also what we do is we want to qualify that information. If 70% of the people are leaving during the day to go to work, well, what is that 30% that's still left in the community? What is their true purchasing power? Just because 70% leave doesn't mean that 30% can't sustain a restaurant or maybe a sit-down restaurant or fast casual. So it's important for us as a company to really understand both on a quantitative level but also on a qualitative level of what is that true workforce population. And that's something that we spend a lot of time on. Challenge all the communities to get need to have this report, but also a true understanding to be able to talk to the retail community on the true opportunities, both during the day and at night.
And we mentioned this already, but if you're having trouble with that daytime workforce population, hearing from restaurants, hearing from retailers, they don't have a strong enough daytime population, really take a look at that cell phone analysis because I think that'll help you.
Okay, so lastly, when we
Yeah,
start talking,
I'll take this slide, Bryce. What's really important, the first question we get every time we go out and recruit on behalf of our clients, the first question we get is from these retailers and these developers is where can I put my business? What sites are available? We go to all these ICSC conferences and we go to just conferences throughout the country, and I watch communities do this, and they'll say, "Hey, come to our community. It's a great community. We've got everything you need." But then when a retailer or developer asks them what sites are available, they don't have those sites ready to go. So just real quick, just want to stress to know what sites are available, whether it's new development or maybe it's a redevelopment site. Is make sure you have a database of available sites. That's what we do for our clients, and we recommend all communities do that. But make sure you have a list of available sites. If it's a restaurant that you're going after, a casual sit down restaurant, and they're looking for 1.75 acres, well, be able to go back to them the same day or the next day and say, well, here are the three 1.5, 1.75 acre sites we have available. That's key. So when you're recruiting, make sure you know what sites are available.
okay,
You
so
also want to focus on recruiting retailers. Go after the retailers that fit your community. Can't stress this enough, but if you're a community of 2,000 and your trade area is 10,000, well, Cabela's is probably not going to take a look at you. Focus on those retailers that fit. Maybe it's a Shopco, maybe it's a neighborhood market that fit your community. Really focus your efforts on those retailers that make sense. Don't waste the time of these retailers and developers if they don't fit your community, because something could change in your community. If 5 years down the road, they could be a fit. So you want to build that rapport. You want to keep that relationship with them, but don't pester, don't bother these retailers if they're not a fit for your community.
once we've determined, and you as a community have worked through the analysis portion, like we call it, you have all the reports, you have that vision of the community established. We've got a development plan for each one of these retail districts. Then we move into like Aaron talked about, the actual recruitment portion of it. And this is extremely important. And what it is the way that we approach this of the client communities that we work with, and everything that I'm going to talk about from a marketing perspective. I am going to kind of show you examples of how we do it as a company, but keep in mind, from a community perspective, we want to go through all this to give you examples and ideas of how you can best market your community. Certainly, we can help, and that's what we do. But I wanted to use kind of our examples to give the community, you in the community, an idea of some of the ways that we approach the recruitment portion. But there's a lot of different things that we do, and we'll walk through them. But videos, brochures, market profiles. Obviously, you've got all your demographics, your psychographics, all those reports. But it's important to package those individually when you identify and you target these retailers, is to get specific information that they're looking for in front of them. And that's something that we spend a lot of time doing, is because each one of these retailers have a different, something different that they're looking for. So we want to be very retail specific, and have a targeted strategic approach of getting the right information in front of these retailers. The first thing, being kind of a retail market profile. And this is a kind of a front and back flyer. And basically, you've got your retail trade area, the population, some of the key demographics of that retail trade area. Mentioned before, this is important because this shows this moves beyond the city limits. This is your true market potential. And this is important to get in a single one-page flyer that's easy for them to read. What is that market? What are the demographics of that market? On the backside, what is the current retail base? It's important for them to see what is already there from a competition perspective. That's extremely important. Maybe it's an opportunity that they don't have competition there, so maybe they see it as an opportunity to get there before the competition. So just a one-page flyer with that key information is important, especially when we start talking about going to these conferences, of having that easy-to-read information readily available to them.
Yeah, you want to keep this simple. Go to a lot of these conferences, and you'll see these communities that have 50-page packets that they're handing out to these retailers. Well, if you stick around long enough and you start walking out the conference at the end of it, see those big drum trash cans that are filled with those packages, those marketing packages communities put together. Keep it simple. Focus your marketing efforts specific to the seller. Put together a marketing package for Target. Make sure that it has Target's logo on there. They want to see. So a lot of times a front and back flyer, like we have on the screen here, works well to hand over initially at a conference or in a sit-down meeting. You can follow up with more information later, but typically, we like to stress to keep it simple as it relates to marketing materials, at least initially.
So the community marketing profile and the retail market profile is kind of the first step. That's a comprehensive overview of the market potential. One thing, like Aaron just mentioned, when we start to contact individual retailers, and as you as a community, once you've identified the type of retailer, the certain retailers that you want to target, is putting together, we call it a retail feasibility study, and basically it is a specific report that goes to that retailer, and some of the things that we include in that feasibility study is the community overview that we talked about, that retail trade area map, the demographics, the leakage report. And we want to highlight that if there's a leakage report in sit-down restaurants and we're sending that out to an Applebee's, we want to highlight that in the report. The psychographics, traffic counts. That's important for a lot of these retailers. And also in this feasibility study, include a site that you think is applicable to that retailer. And Aaron mentioned it. That's the fastest way to go from interest to action is to have that site for them. So we want to include that in that feasibility study. And this is we're going to get the information that they want in an easy to read format, comprehensive, everything that they need, and it's a targeted approach. So a feasibility study to a CVS is going to look different than a feasibility study to an Applebee's, or a Chili's is going to look different from Applebee's. Those kind of things. Have that targeted approach because it adds credibility from the community perspective in the eyes of these retailers, and it gives these site selectors easy information to digest to bump your community up to the top of the list of the options that they have. And we've talked about it multiple times. Site profiles. This is something that's extremely important that we spend a lot of time with, is because getting interest from a retailer sometimes is the first step, but to get to the actual locating in your community, having a site available and marketing that site sometimes is the easiest way to go from A to Z. And so we want to identify prime real estate for these retailers, and we want to market that. So some of the things that are included: price. What are those demographics of the retail trade area that the site is within? And some of the key property information or site information. We want to have all of that so they have access to that, and it's easy for them to digest and easy for them to see the opportunity. On the back, traffic, current retail around that site, where that site is in the larger area market. Those are things when they're looking at these sites. Those are all things that they're analyzing it, and putting all that in a report, front and back easy report, just helps them that much more to look at that site or look at your community as a true opportunity. We've talked about it multiple times, but these site selectors a lot of times are working multiple state, sometimes multiple state, certainly covering an entire state, and they've got a lot of different things that they're looking for, a lot of different communities that they're looking for and opportunities. And so having this level of information get in front of them, it only helps them to bump up your community when they start looking at the different opportunities in the different communities that they can locate their stores in.
Bryce, we had a question as far as what is the best way to get the retailer criteria. One way to do that is to go to their website. You can go to their website, and a lot of times if you look under real estate or locations on the website, it'll list what retailers' criteria are. You could also, if you're not a member of the International Council of Shopping Centers, become a member. As a community, you can become a member for $100. And that'll give you access to some of this database of retailers, developers, what their criteria are. Or you can call us and we'll help you figure out the criteria for some of these retailers.
So moving on, one of the things on the community websites, these site selectors, we've talked about, when they're doing their work, they're looking at a lot of different communities, and so they're going to the community website and they're looking for that data. A lot of these national, regional retailers, they have this data, but once again, the survey, all of them want to go to your community to both look at the data that you have on the website, to not only supplement what they already have, but validate what they have, and they want to see the community perspective. So having all of the data, your demographics, psychographics, your leakage, having all that information on the website in a graphical format is important. You want to make it as easy as possible for these site selectors to get all the information that they need for their representative retailers that they're representing, or the restaurants that they're representing. So having that information on that website is extremely important. And that's one of the things that we do. You can either create a standalone retail website within your community, or incorporate that into the community website that you already have. But having that tangible information is extremely important. And lastly, we talked about it in the different steps. You go through the analysis portion, you go through the vision and what the strategy for the community is. You move into the kind of the marketing. You've identified those retailers that you're targeting that you think are a fit for your community. You've developed that marketing material. The next step is getting out to the conferences. And Aaron's going to kind of walk through some of the preparation as far as the conferences go, because this is important, of being fully prepared. But like we said, it starts with that foundation of the data. Then you want to move into having that material ready for those retailers, and then this is the culmination of getting in front of those retailers and presenting that information.
Great, thanks, Bryce. So, some of your conference goals. So we talked about International Council of Shopping Centers. We've got the Retail Live Conference. The one for Texas is coming up in a couple weeks, August 18th. So if you're familiar with ICSC, make sure you attend those regional and those national, but also take a look at Retail Live. They've got different conferences throughout the country. I know there's one in Los Angeles, one in Chicago, there's one in Dallas, or I'm sorry, it's in Austin this year. So make sure you're attending these conferences, that you're expected as communities to go out and recruit. Set realistic goals at these conferences. Don't go out to these conferences expecting to make a deal. I've maybe seen one or two deals take place at these conferences, but be realistic. Your goal at these is to make connections. It's networking. That's what this business is. It's going out and making those connections. Attend the social functions. Can't stress that enough. But sometimes you're able to meet people over a drink or over some appetizers. Also attend the educational seminars. New retailers, new concepts, public-private partnerships are a lot of the topics that are typically discussed there. And then manage the expectations of your council and board. That's key. We'll see a lot of these communities take council members and board members out there. Just manage the expectations that you're not going to make a deal out there, but you're going to be able to follow up when you get back to the office with some of these connections you make. Be prepared. Some of the things we talked about already. Know that community demographics. Know what your trade area size is, how big it is. Know what retailers are in your community, where they're located. Know about the vacancies, what properties are available, new development versus redevelopment. Know about planned development. A lot of times, and Bryce mentioned this earlier, but being able to show your community is growing is key. So know what communities are coming to what new planned communities are coming, how many people are coming is key. Have that gap analysis available, and then know your strengths and weaknesses and how you compete with your communities. So typically retailers are looking at your community, but they're looking at other communities as well. So be able to talk about what makes your community stand out. Marketing materials are key. We talked about this already. Keep it simple. I'm a big fan of taking an iPad. If you take an iPad, you can have your marketing materials on an iPad. You can email it directly to them while you're at the conference. It'll allow you to pull up a map if you need to, an aerial map or something along those lines. So keep an iPad with you, maybe a personal binder, but keep it simple and be ready to email out directly at the conference or after the conference so that before these site selectors get back to their office, they'll have this information in their inbox. We talked about this already, so I'm not going to spend time on it, but having that front and back one-page flyer for your community is key to hand out. The key, again, following up afterwards with a more detailed, comprehensive package. Know your approach. Can't stress this enough, but structure your day. Attend the workshops early and then visit the leasing mall. So if you're at ICSC, the way it's set up there is there's something called a leasing mall. And that's where the retailers and developers will have booths. Typically, there's a rush in the morning of the first couple of days to go talk to these retailers. What we've found works better is to go visit them in the afternoon. Less of a rush. You're able to go up and actually have conversations. Target those retailers that fit. Set up meetings ahead of time. Can't stress that enough. But sell your community and then sell the site. Here's an example selection criteria for In-N-Out Burger. They require a lot size of about 45,000 square feet. Their seating capacity. Just to emphasize again, make sure you're targeting those retailers that fit your community. You're paying close attention to their selection criteria. Have that 5-minute elevator pitch. When you go to these conferences, typically you get 5 minutes or less to kind of give, a detailed, not very detailed, but you give your chance to kind of pitch your community. For example, the elevator pitch we have on this slide is our community serves a regional trade area of approximately 95,000. Our primary retail area is anchored by Walmart, Kohl's, etc. There remains $8.5 million of unmet restaurant demand. We feel like we're a great fit for Chili's. Your closest unit is 25 miles away in Madison. Can I get 10 minutes of your time? So, have that elevator pitch, kind of use that elevator pitch as a way to set up a meeting ahead of time at the conference. Can't stress that enough. Post-conference. This is very important. You've got to follow up. Like I said, you're going to these conferences to make connections, but then following up is critical. Just in every type of business, you've got to follow up. If you met with a retailer or a developer while you were there, whether it was planned or drop-in, email them a short thank you note, on the same day, so it's there at their office when they return. Email them a thank you note so it's there when they return. If it's applicable, have site-specific information. So if you met with In-N-Out Burger and they said, hey, we're looking at your community and we want to see an acre-and-a-half site, have those sites, send them to them the same day, email them. Kind of goes back to having that database of available sites. That's key. Name recognition is critical, just as in any type of marketing, that brand recognition is critical. Keep your name and community in front of the retailer as much as possible. Remember this too. Just because a retailer tells you no or they're not interested today, that could change 6 months from now or a year from now. So be persistent with these retailers and developers, but not pesky. It's a slow process, but it works. If a community planned community announces 3,000 new homes going to your community, shoot an email over to that retailer, to that developer, and say, hey, just wanted to let you know we've got 9,000 new people coming into the community over this time period. I want you to have this information. It's a good way to follow up. So take a long-term approach, and just to kind of final summarize here, take a long-term approach. We see a lot of communities that'll focus on retail recruitment and development. They'll focus on it for a year, and then they'll forget about it. Well, retail recruitment and development takes time. Typically for a retailer or developer to locate your community, it's at least 12 to 18 months, if not longer. So make sure you're staying with it, you're steady, you're going to these conferences, you're staying in touch with the retailers and restaurants. That is key. So, if you take the approach we talked about today and you really focus that on your community, you'll have success. Focus on the retail trade area. You want it to be as large as possible, but it's got to be accurate. Focus on the gap analysis, being able to show, or leakage analysis, being able to show to these retailers, to these developers that there's demand. That is key. And then, like we said, focus on marketing and focus on those sites, and you'll have success. We've got a question that just came up here. So if we've got a few more minutes, we'll stick around. So if you have any questions, feel free to put them in now. But one of the questions we had is, if a broker has a listing, should a community just use the broker's brochure? Should the community provide a link to the broker's brochure, or is it better to have a consistent looking brochure for all properties in the community? We're big fans of the retail coach of kind of using those site profiles we talked about, having kind of a uniform look. So, I think, the broker's brochure is good to have and use it if you don't have the capabilities to create your own marketing packages. But we would probably emphasize, creating your own, having your contact information on there as well, so that you're involved in the process. So if they're reaching out to a broker, they're also reaching out to you. But we're big fans of kind of creating your own marketing brochures, your own site profiles. It seems to work better, in our opinion, doing it that way, and it gives you a little bit of control as an economic developer or a city as well. I hate to say this, but and we're big fans of brokers, but a lot of time brokers go where the deals are the quickest and the easiest. So they might get a response from a retailer or from a developer showing they have interest, but maybe might not follow up on it as quickly. So if you create that brochure, you can follow up on it and make sure some things are taking place. The question we received, another question is, how can a community determine the trade area for a proposed or new retail center? So maybe it's a retail center that hasn't gone in yet. What we would suggest doing is going to other retail centers in the community, maybe running a cell phone analysis on a similar similar shopping center within your trade area, within your city, and running a cell phone analysis and determining the trade area based off of that. You might have to do a potential analysis, and we do a lot of those, where we can determine what the trade area has the potential to be based on the type of development. So that's one way to look at it, is to maybe look at other developments in the community, and kind of look at it that way. The cell phone analysis is going to be key. Determining where the retailers or where your customers are coming from can be done by that cell phone analysis. So make sure you've really got you've got good data to back up that trade area. That's, like I said, you want it to be as accurate as possible, as large as possible, but it has to be accurate. So anything you can do would be good to determine that trade area. We had a couple more questions on the cell phone analysis. How quickly can something like that be turned around? We just need a week or two to develop that cell phone analysis on the sites. We go back a year from the previous date. So, from today, we'd go back to August 2nd of 2015 and look at data that way. The cell phone analysis can be broken down based on time of day. So Bryce mentioned it already, but if you're looking for specifically daytime information, if you're looking for specifically a certain time period, maybe a certain couple of months or like the summer, we can break it down that way as well. So feel free to reach out to us if there's other questions on the cell phone analysis. We've got on the slide that's on the screen now, you'll see info@theretailcoach.net. Any other questions you might have or any comments or anything like that, feel free to reach out to us at that address, info@theretailcoach.net. Um, and we'd love to help you. You know, even if it's something small or you just have a question, we're willing to help you brainstorm some ideas, whatever it might be.
And I'll add, Aaron, we will be sending out a recording of the webinar along with the presentation. You should be receiving that today or tomorrow, but we will be providing everybody a copy of that so you can use it however you want to.
Yeah, a couple of dates that are important that are coming up. You've got the Retail Live conference that's coming up in Austin. That's August 18th. You've got the ICSC San Diego conference that's coming up. I believe that's August 30th through September 1st in San Diego. So make sure you take a look at what conferences are coming up. Being prepared for those conferences is going to be key. For those of you that are in the Southwest that go to the ICSC Southwest Conference that takes place in Dallas, just want to let you know they moved that up. In the past, it's been in November. They moved it up to the first week of October this year. So just want to emphasize that in case you're planning for that or looking at that. The first week of October is going to be key. Um, Bryce, do you have anything else to add?
No, if there's no other questions, like Aaron mentioned, we'll reiterate, we will be sending all this information out. Please reach out to us at the information on this screen. Anything is big or small, any questions that you have, I would love to hear from you. And if there's no other questions, I guess we'll go ahead and jump off. We really appreciate all the time. I know a lot of you were on the webinar a few weeks ago, and you joined us again this week. And so we really appreciate the time. Hopefully, it was of value, and we look forward to hearing from everybody soon.
Awesome. Thanks again, everybody. Thanks, Bryce.